And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Vix Anderton. How are you, Vix?
Hi, Croydon. I am really well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show. And I'm excited to be speaking with you today. I love the title on your website. It says Energy Maven, Embodiment Coach, and Recovering Perfectionist. So those three things are, an episode unto its own.
Yeah.
And just in the way of your story, so you are the founder and chief energy officer at the Practical Balance. You were a former military officer. And with your journey, you've gotten to coaching, authenticity, and embodiment. And I love this word embodiment because it's something personally for myself this year. I've made a personal note to pay more attention to because I found that, for the past many, many years, I've been living in my mind. And with speaking with many people over the past year, just to discover that embodiment is a whole different mind on its own, if you will. And you are a certified embodied facilitator, a well-being and emotional intelligence coach, a mental health first aider, level 6 diploma leadership and management with a Reiki level 2 practitioner and a yoga teacher RYT 200. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's a lot of labels.
It's a lot, yeah, but I'm sure they all baseline at some point, right? The foundation of what you do. So how did you get into embodiment? Was there sort of like a trigger effect in your life, or was it a natural progression, or?
A little bit of both, actually. So I guess my journey into coaching started after I burnt out in my job. I was working in the international development sector, and burnt out. And decided that I wanted to leave and start working for myself. So I was already trained to be a yoga teacher and kind of got into coaching, and things were going pretty well until I went through a really significant breakup, actually. And I was, kind of searching for, more meaning in my life, connecting with different communities. And I was at a little festival for entrepreneurs called the Happy Startup School, and was chatting to somebody about the fact that I was feeling quite lonely, and that I felt that I had missed a lesson somewhere in life, that everybody else seemed to have skills to build relationships and friendships that I didn't think I had. And the person that I was speaking to said, funnily enough, a friend of mine is running a course on something called authentically in London next week, and I think you'd really like it. So I turned up at this thing without really knowing what I was getting myself in for. And authentic relating is, by its nature, an embodied practice. It's a practice of building more trustworthy, vulnerable, authentic, meaningful relationships, first with yourself and then with other people. And it blew my heart wide open. Actually, for the first time, I think I really dropped out of what it was like to live in my head and this constant kind of critical narrative, constantly analysing everything, not feeling enough, and dropping into this sense of kind of calm and presence that I had occasionally experienced through yoga, but had found it really difficult to translate off my yoga mat. And so that weekend was both a particular trigger and what has now become a sort of a 3-year dive into various embodied practices, ecstatic dance. I did the Embodied Facilitator course last year, so a year-long training into embodied work, embodied coaching, and now here I am.
Got it. What does it mean to be embodied? What is your definition of that? And, especially with the number of years you've spent with it, what does that definition maybe evolve to?
Yeah, so a sort of a basic definition is the way that we're embodied is how we are in any given moment. So I sort of joked about or laughed at sort of the number of labels that I have, yoga teacher, coach, etc. Embodiment strips that away and focuses, I think, more on being as a verb. So rather than, I am Vix, it's like I am Vixing. And so through embodied practices, we can cultivate greater self-awareness and deeper presence and connection with both ourselves, and through ourselves, because ultimately, you know, the only way we experience the world, you know, our brains are kind of shut away in these bony boxes in our heads. The only way we experience the world is through our bodies, is through our senses. And so when we're more connected into our own body, into our own senses, we're more able to be in connection with other people, and quite importantly, the natural world, the world around us. So embodied tools allow us to cultivate greater self-awareness. And then they also allow us to generate more choice. So it's all well and good kind of being aware of a particular pattern, you know, whether it's an attachment style in relationship, or, you know, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I have a particular pattern around work, for example. Self-awareness only gets you so far. Like if you're aware of something, but you don't have any tools that allow you to do anything differently, then it's quite frustrating. You just kind of aware of the fact that you're stuck in this loop that you can't get out of. So embodied tools also allow us to start to generate a new way of being. And most of us know this intuitively, right? So if you're really tired, for example, and you have an important meeting that you need to go to, most of us know to kind of energize ourselves in some way. So it might be through caffeine or sugar, but it, you know, it could also be, you know, a few star jumps, or we stretch, you know, we kind of like want to bring our energy upwards. And the same way, if you wanted to have a good night's sleep and wanted to start resting, you probably wouldn't start playing, you know, really heavy thrash metal and dancing around your bedroom.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can use our embodiment to change our state in the moment, and then to develop new traits, develop new choice about who we are, how we're showing up in the world.
Got it. Yeah. And, you know, I like that you're talking about these things, because too often I find, and, you know, this is maybe because of, you know, being absorbed in culture and just, you know, by learning by rote, we tend to take shortcuts to achieve that particular desired state. So, for example, you know, you mentioned caffeine. I always felt that caffeine is sort of, you know, cheating to get, you know, that high energy state. Whereas if you take the time to maybe work out, it will take a bit longer. It will require more energy than, you know, just lifting the cup and sipping from it and getting that immediate gratification. But, you know, the endorphins that kick in when you work out, they're as on par. You know, I'm not comparing it to caffeine, but, you know, in terms of that energy boost you're talking about, right? The state of mind.
Yeah.
You can utilize your body, but it does take time, and it's not instant gratification.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Although some of the embodiment tools I use with people can have an almost immediate effect. Not necessarily a very long-term effect. You know, it's a state changer, but I think practice over time does allow us to create a different trait. You know, we start to generate new muscles and new neural pathways that make a different way of being, and ultimately like a different way of thinking. You know, our perception is, you know, we don't perceive some kind of universal truth. The way that we perceive the world is so influenced by our physiological state. Anybody who gets hangry knows that. You know, if I've not eaten for a while, suddenly like everything is bad in the world. You know, it's just. Yeah. But I don't know that that's what I'm thinking at the time. It's only when I have something to eat, and suddenly the world is full of like unicorns and rainbows again. I'm like, oh yeah, wow! Like my hunger had really impacted my my perception of the world.
Sure, and you know, people like Tony Robbins are famous for, you know, talking about states, and that it starts with states, because, you know, the state you're in is how you're going to relate to people, right, into the environment. Yeah. And if you're in the wrong state, you know, you'll be giving out the wrong information, and people won't perceive you correctly. They might not know what state you're coming from, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I personally try and stay away from kind of the idea of it being like right or wrong, but like what is, yeah, can I have more choice about how I want the state I want to be in a given moment? Am I able to, do I have enough tools to match my external environment appropriately?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there can be like a mismatch, which, you know, we might describe as wrong. But particularly as a recovering perfectionist, I really try and avoid kind of like binary terms, because there's in and of itself, that state isn't wrong. It's kind of mismatched to the circumstances that we're in, and therefore we're not getting what we want out of the situation.
Correct. No, that's true, because you could be at a very festive birthday party and you could be sulking, and someone will look at you and say, hey, that person's sulking, why are they even here? What are they doing? But then, maybe they're sulking because of an incident that happened that day that was quite terrible, right? And it's just overcome them. They're in that state that they can't enjoy the birthday party.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, for me, it really comes around back to choice. For that person who, perhaps they are upset about something, do I want to stay in that? Like, is it useful for me to stay in those feelings right now and to understand them, really understand and feel what has upset me? Or in that moment, do I want to be able to access a slightly different state that feels more appropriate? Like, okay, I'm at a birthday party, so I don't want to bypass my feelings. I want to just ignore them and disassociate. That's kind of becoming disembodied. I'm a bit of a robot just to please other people. But, can I shift my state a little bit so that I can enjoy the gathering that I'm in for a short time and then come back to my upset feelings later on if they're still present?
Got it. Yes. And this is where I think awareness is so important, because in order for you to recognize, the state that you're in, you have to be aware. And I really think that one of the nicest things we have is the willpower that we have, which can allow us to reset, any sort of state, any condition, that we're in, as long as we're sort of aware of it. Because I feel too often, especially with myself, and I'm sure this is with people, you're in sort of this conscious aware state, but then sometimes you get into the trance state and you're always, flitting between with these two for, the most part. And it's when you're in that sort of trance state that you can't be aware, because you're sort of in a different state, right? And things like music will get you into a trance, or, your environment, or, memories that come up into your subconscious mind. So it's always sort of like this battle between getting control of your aware state and then being the victim in this trance state, right? So if you can be aware as much as you can, because like you're saying, it's not binary. It's not that the person sulking at the birthday party, is at fault. It's just, it's life, it's behavior, it's psychology, it's physiology. That's just what they happen to be in. So as best as you can, if you can maintain some sort of awareness, then you have more control over the on and off switch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would describe, awareness as a spectrum of itself. Unless you're unconscious, we're always aware of something. But the level of nuance and presence that we might have in that awareness. So, for me, it was some of the first times I experienced this, when moving from this place where my attention was really in my head and caught up in my thoughts, and very much resisting reality, that's how I describe it, dropping from that into more embodied self-awareness, and noticing what was happening in my body at the same time as what was happening in my mind, and suddenly opening up a doorway to a whole other set of sensory data, essentially. And that's not to, I definitely believe in the sort of, it's our minds and our bodies are intrinsically linked. Our brain is part of our nervous system, and the two things aren't separate. But I do think the way that we are educated and socialized, and our culture is incredibly disembodied, ever since, well, at least since Descartes, and I think therefore I am, and probably hundreds, if not thousands of years beforehand. One of my teachers, Philip Shepherd's, dates kind of humans becoming disembodied right back to us becoming sedentary agricultural people, compared to nomads who are much more sort of sensitive to the natural environment. But as soon as we became sedentary or settled in one place, and people had to start doing painful backbreaking work, he says that's when we started to get disembodied. But anyway, all of us are really cultured in this. So it takes a lot of practice, actually, to, I think, cultivate self-awareness as a skill, and one that we can get increasingly adept at, I think.
No, for sure. And I wonder sometimes if Descartes might have said, I have a body, therefore I think. You never know, right? I mean, that sort of aspect. And, I always wish that, and this is again, just from learning and speaking with people, that it's really important that parents are able to teach children. They teach them many things to do with, the intellect, but with the body and feelings. When people get into martial arts, it's always about themselves against an opponent. And this is for, maybe for fighting or for learning techniques or just for learning discipline. But I think, you can spend a great deal of time trying to do martial arts with yourself and trying to manage your body, trying to manage your feelings, because that's really what it comes down to. If you can have that awareness and control over your body and your feelings, it's going to make life so much better, because you're not going to fall victim to, certain states of mind and conditions. You'll become strong out of that. You'll harness that discipline, right?
Yeah, I was finding your choice of words really interesting. So like managing and controlling, like that still for me feels a little bit head down. Of like, oh, like the state that I'm in, my feelings are something that I have to like manage and control. They have to look a certain way. And I think increasingly with my work, I'm exploring like what is it like to be with, to listen to understand that those are, my feelings are sensory data. The work of I just forgot her name, Amanda somebody, was written a great book about neuroscience, and her book is called How Emotions Are Made, and her name will come back to me. But essentially, in her model, her theory at the moment is that emotions are our brain's way of making sense of sensory information. So we have, kind of stories and beliefs that have been cultivated in us since childhood, and that when our bodies are processing billions of bits of information per second from our senses, our emotions is kind of like a product of that, our brain making sense of the world around us from locked away in this bony box. And therefore, for me, that becomes less about controlling and more about listening and being responsive. In exactly the same way, if I put my hand on a hot stove, my body would register pain and I would want to move my hand away from that. Being able to kind of notice that on an emotional level. Okay, I'm feeling really angry right now. What is that? What was the sort of the sensory trigger that has this kind of story of this emotion of anger in my system right now? What can I do about that in response to it, rather than something that has to be, I think the way that I very much grew up, a very sort of military background. My father was in the Air Force as well. So I sort of did 30 years in the military, and the answer was always, like feelings are no good. You squash them down, you push them away, you manage them, you control them. Like they're not welcome here. And so, yeah, I'm increasingly exploring how life is to welcome all of that, to turn towards, to orientate towards reality more than having to try and control it.
Exactly. And I should highlight, you are right, that when I say manage and control, I don't mean to pass judgment on it, but like you're saying, just to be able to steer you into the direction that you want to go and not fall, victim to direction that you might be in, right? Because I see that too often than not. Someone, gets into a bad way, into a bad, mood or situation, and then they allow themselves to spiral and build up the momentum within that negativity. Whereas if we had the awareness, you're able to sort of, with that discipline, take a time out, breathe, get into your body, get into your feelings, embrace it. Like you're saying, welcome it, think about it, and say that it's okay. It's not judgmental, but here's where I need to be for the betterment of, whatever at that point.
And, well, I think one of the reasons, I know one of the reasons that I tend to spiral into emotions that feel difficult or challenging is because they feel difficult and challenging, and I don't want to feel them. But very much like a toddler that is being ignored, the more I try to suppress and ignore that emotion, the louder it gets, and so it is so easy to get into that spiral. And I want to acknowledge, for me anyway, like just how incredibly difficult that is, because it doesn't feel good. And I think there's something in our human the human condition, and in fact, you see this for any animal. Any animal will move towards something that's pleasant. Yeah, we move towards something that feels nice, and we move away from things that feel yucky or dangerous or unpleasant. You know, it's a really basic biological response. And as humans, we're no different. Like, it's hard to feel the difficult emotions. It's hard to sit with sadness and grief or anger. And actually, back to your point, it's because I don't think we're really taught. You know, like we're taught to kind of like dry our eyes, or, you know, like, especially as kind of women, you know, don't be angry. You know, good girls and nice girls and happy. And I have a very vivid memory of being about 9 years old and a teacher walking past me and telling me off for looking miserable. You know, and I was at boarding school. You know, I was like hundreds of miles away from my family and most likely homesick at the time, but I was told that that wasn't okay. Stop looking miserable. You're meant to look happy. And I think so many of us are taught that. So it's like what we're talking about, it sounds easy. And in my experience, it's anything but.
No, and that's where the martial arts and the discipline comes in, right? Because it's trying to harness this entity, right? And sometimes I think that there's too much emphasis placed on happiness, and then it becomes like a drug. You know, you've sampled a bit, then you want more and more, and that's all you want to be in, is that state of happiness. But there's many virtues and lessons to be learned from adversity, and then from, you know, being in the middle point of happiness and sadness. And, you know, the scale is a spectrum, and it may be binary at the, you know, the extreme ends of it, but, you know, there's a whole bunch of in between points as well, right?
And it feels like it's so human, you know, like to have this kind of like broad spectrum of experience is what it is to be a human being, in my opinion. And again, you know, come back to this idea of self-awareness, my experience is never one-dimensional. You know, I'm never just happy or just sad. And you know, and those are really kind of like simplistic words for often very complex emotions. But that there are so many levels of my experience in any one moment. And that's actually why a practice like authentic relating really appeals to me, because there's something, you know, that's a mind-body integration. Like, something my brain loves is kind of like getting really curious about, like, oh, okay, so there's a little bit of, I'm feeling a little bit of gratitude over there, and there's a little bit of irritation. Like, what else is here? Like, I get really fascinated by my own experience in the moment and by somebody else's. I think it's, it really delights me, the kind of the humanity of it all. And we all have our own like unique kaleidoscopes of that in any given moment, but we're all painted with the same colors. You know, we're all human. I challenge anybody to think of a situation or an experience that one person is having that has not been experienced by somebody else on the planet alive today, or at least in history. Like, we're not as individual and unique as we think we are sometimes, I think.
No, for sure. And even if you might not have experienced it on, you know, that level of a scale that they might have, you might have, you know, to some certain point, and it's relative. Something you would have experienced, they might not have as well. So for sure. What when you speak of relating authentically, now say you were to meet someone, how would you put that into practice? Because, you know, for someone like me, I try to, and this is, you know, even when I was young, ask the questions that are sort of life forward moving questions. You know, I go deep on the first conversation. I'm not a good person that scratches off the surface. So, you know, if I'm at a networking event, I'm going philosophical right away with people. And sometimes that doesn't work out too well, right? People are there to have a couple of drinks and, you know, have a couple of laughs. But, you know, to relate authentically with a person, that's really one of the best things you can do, right?
It's beautiful.
How do you approach it, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and condense about 18 hours worth of training into about 2 minutes now. So authentic relating, it, like, it's 2 words very specifically. So the authentic part is how am I being real? How am I honoring my own experience and sharing that in a way that is appropriate for me? The relating part is that I'm doing that in relationship with somebody else. So it's not radical honesty. I'm not going to speak everything that's true for me, regardless of how it impacts the other person. I am honoring self and honoring other. And there are a couple of really useful tools that we teach around this. So one is around setting context. So how do you get permission and buy-in for a conversation? Because like you say, the context at a networking event is, there are these implicit rules about what those conversations look like. And it can be jarring for people. It is jarring for people when somebody switches up those rules without explicitly naming it and getting consent for that. Yeah. So setting context for a different style of conversation, which could even, it can look very simple of like, would it be okay if I asked you about your views on X, Y, and Z? And that person is then able to say yes or no. Another like super tool for me is curiosity. I have yet to find a person who is not interesting if I can get interested enough in them. We all love to be asked questions about ourselves. We all love to kind of to share about ourselves when we're given permission. And yeah, there's something about that superpower of curiosity. But perhaps there's a simple model that I often use in these kind of situations is there are 3 levels of conversation, all of which are actually really important. This is not a hierarchy. To have a well-rounded conversation and relationship, we need all 3 aspects of this. So the first level is informational. So that would be small talk, talking about the weather, what did you do today? Things that are quite factual. But it's really important. It helps us set in context where that person is coming from, asking one of the most common, I live in Bali at the moment, and one of the most common questions you get asked is, where are you from? Yeah. And it's because you get some context about that person. Oh, you're British. Okay. I think I can imagine some things about you based on that. We then have the personal level, which is when we start to kind of talk about our values, what we're passionate about, what we care about, what lights us up in the world, what are we feeling frustrated about at the moment. So if the informational level is, this is what has happened to me today, the personal level would be, this is how I feel about what has happened today. And then there's a third level, which is the relational level. And that is what is happening right here, right now, in this moment between the two of us, like in this relationship. So that might be me starting to share a little bit more of what is going on for me in my experience. So, in your example, it could be, wow, I notice I'm feeling a little bit bored by this kind of level of small talk. I would really love to talk about this thing. How would that be for you? Immediately kind of drops it from that informational level into relationship. And then, so you have these 3 levels of being able to kind of move through them gracefully in a way that is also like sensitive to where the other person is at. That I think is the real skill of authentic relating.
Got it. And would you do this in one conversation, in the first conversation, or is this something that might develop over the course of maybe a number of meetings, or like this is basically how friendship develops, right? I mean, yeah.
So friendships basically. So I think most of us have learned that it takes time to drop from informational into personal, and actually very few of us, I think, are taught to be in the relational space. We very rarely talk about like what it is like to be with somebody when we're with them. Yeah. And we're taught that it takes time. I don't think it has to. I think it's. I definitely had experiences in really boring places, like the supermarket checkout, where it's possible to move from one level to another, to go quite deep into a conversation very quickly. But the thing around consent is important, and I will always lead. So I always try to role model. So if I'm going to ask somebody how they feel about something, particularly how they feel about something in the moment, I will role model that first. Say, I notice this is how I feel right now. I'm curious what's going on for you.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that can be a really powerful way. But authentic relating, there's a lot of emphasis on the talking, but actually a huge part of it is the listening. it's receiving somebody else well, responding to where they're at, and looking for the little hooks, even that informational level, like people are leaving little breadcrumbs to things that they care about and they want to talk about. And I think the skill of a good conversationalist is to pick up on those breadcrumbs. Oh yeah, okay, I hear you just talked about, I hear you talk about bees, for example. I don't really know much about that. Is that something that you're really interested in? And suddenly it's like this doorway for this person to be like, oh yeah, I love bees. I keep bees at the weekend and da 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 da. Or like I hate bees. I was stung as a child. And there's this like whole little thread that you can start to pull on. Like, oh, okay, yeah, could you tell me more about that? How is it for you to, and then drop into the relational level, how is it for you to be telling me about this right now?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really like, when you started explaining this, you mentioned, honor yourself and honor and respect the other person, because I think that really is the fundamental out of all of this, because you want to be authentic, not only to the other person, but especially to yourself. You don't want to compromise your values or, your characteristics, and because if you do that, then it's not going to be an authentic relationship, right? Like you might have a lot of fun on the surface level, but on the baseline, underneath everything, it might not be clicking. Right? It might not be a match.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, like being authentic it's making an intentional choice. So there will be times where, I might be in a situation and I choose not to reveal everything I'm feeling in that moment.
Sure.
So it's not about bearing my soul. It's about like, how much of myself does it feel okay to bring to the surface right now? And sometimes that's like none at all. And other times, with certain people that can be, some of the most shameful parts, things that I'm finding most difficult to be with in my own experience. And yeah, I think it can take a little bit of time and discernment to do that, and we're authentic first with ourselves. I think we often think about how we're authentic to other people, and this is where, for me, like authentic relating meets like the cyclical living part of it. Is like, how are we being true to who we are and where we are in any given cycle in that moment, and making a choice about how we're showing up.
Got it. And I like that you say also, being true. And showing up authentically means to be true with every interaction and in every sort of, conversation and course of the way. Because that's what it is, when you communicate authentically. If something's making you happy, say that. If something's not making you happy, say that, right? Because if you're not, you're just taking it further away of what can be a very powerful and authentic relationship. So that truth is important.
Yeah, and I would caveat that, so depending on the relationship, because again, the relating part means I care for you and I care for the relationship. Yeah. So there may be times where I might not be happy with something, but I choose not to voice it to you. But I'm still in my authenticity. I'm still in integrity with myself because I have acknowledged that and I have made a deliberate choice about it. So I'm taking ownership of my own experience, and recognizing, okay, I might not be happy about this right now, but I don't need to bring it up to you right now. Yes. Yeah, maybe this is something that I can do on my own, or, I'm in a networking event and I'm having a conversation on, I don't agree with somebody's politics. But it wouldn't necessarily be helpful, or it could even be considered, it might hurt the other person's feelings if I say, actually, I completely disagree with you. Even if that's what I'm feeling inside. So the way that I'm authentic to myself might be to, excuse myself from the conversation.
Well, that makes sense.
Doesn't mean that we have to like engage in every single battle that we come across.
No, for sure. That definitely makes sense, because, some people might have emotional pain points, or they're coming from, different cultural values. And, it'd be nice if everyone was open-minded and then, you could speak about anything, but that's just not the way it is, right? It's a variety of perceptions.
We have a rule of thumb, which is connection over content. Like if what you care about in any given conversation is being right, then authentic relating won't work. Because you're valuing the content over the connection. the more, when you really value the relationship and the quality of the connection that you're having with that person, that's when these, the tools of authentic relating, I think, are incredibly powerful. And, there's a huge amount in the teaching around conflict transformation and how we can be with people who have, vehemently different opinions to us, and stay in connection with them. But we have to value the connection more than our particular point of view being validated.
Got it. No, that's amazing. Thank you so much for coming on this episode, and the wonderful insights that you have in embodiment and with authentic relating. And if people want to get a hold of you and more of your work, where's the best place for them to reach you at? Is it your website?
So it's probably the website, which is thepracticalbalance.com, or I'm spending quite a lot of time on Instagram at the moment. I'm enjoying connecting with people there, and that is Vix Zen, so VIXZEN _warrior.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put both of those in the show notes as well.
Great.
Okay, and once again, thank you very much, Vix, for coming on the episode, and I wish you well.
My pleasure. I noticed that I feel like I was feeling a little bit down earlier this morning, and I feel enlivened by the conversation. So feeling very grateful for you.
My pleasure. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks so much.